Hi everybody, welcome back to the Time of the Signs. Today I would like to do just a brief video on an overall structure of Matthew 24. Now Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 are what's called the Olivet Discourses. And in those we find a lot of information about the end times, and in particular a time called the beginning of sorrows. Now, one of the things about the pre, mid, and post-rapture scenarios is that they don't account for the beginning of sorrows in their rapture scenarios. The pre-trumpet scenario does, however, see that the chapter 6 is the beginning of sorrows. So what I wanted to do is point out the fact that something that I had a real problem with for a while was reconciling the sequence of events in Matthew 24 to the sequence of events in the Revelation. Now, also too, the Luke 21 and Luke 21 and Mark 13 are also seem to be in a different order. So none of the three Gospels appeared to be in agreement as to the sequence of all the events that Jesus was talking about. So rather than trying to say that Matthew 24 was the authoritative version of the Olivet Discourses, what I chose to do was to consider the Revelation as the authoritative sequence of events and see how these books then fit into that. So just as I had done earlier with the entire book of Revelation, and that is do an outline of it to get an overall perspective of the structure of that entire book of Revelation, I decided to use that same technique on the chapter 24 of Matthew. And here's something interesting that I found that I think is the key that unlocks why this does not seem to agree with the sequence of events in the Revelation. If we look at Matthew 24, verse 3, and Jesus is talking with his disciples, and he says, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?'" So we can see that what they were doing is they were asking him a question, actually two questions, in three parts. It wasn't just one question. And in Matthew 24, what we see is they're asking him about these end times things in two questions, and it's actually three parts, but it's two questions. And so what I found is that the rest of the information that's given is not in sequential order. It's in the order that the questions were asked. So if we continue to look at this, and I encourage everyone to study this for yourself, this is something that you're going to have to go over and you're going to have to reconcile in your own mind in order for you to get it. The first question, which is when will these things be, then goes to verses 4 through 14, which are described as the beginning of sorrows. And then in the second part of that question was what will be the sign of your coming? And we see that this is answered in verses 15 through 28, which is the Great Tribulation. That is the sign of his coming. When we see these things happening, then we know that the time is really near. And then the third part of the question is verses 29 to 31 and also 36 to 43, which is the end of the age. I believe it's the end of the church age. So the first part of the question is, tell us, when will these things be? And I believe that that refers to verses 4 through 14. And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I'm the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and betray one another and will hate one another. And then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So this first part, which describes as the beginning of sorrows, indicates that this is when these things will be. This is the time that these things are going to be happening. It's a general type description of the times that we're in. We're in the time of the signs, and this is the beginning of sorrows. So then it continues on, and it says, and what will be the sign of your coming? Well, then when you look at verses 15 through 28, it says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down and take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out, or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Now, there's obviously a lot of mysterious things happening here, but the number one thing that we want to look at is, as a group, this information refers to the Great Tribulation. And since the Great Tribulation is identified here as being started with the abomination of desolation, we know that the abomination of desolation begins at the midpoint of the 70th week. So this particular passage applies to the time from the abomination of desolation until the return of Christ. And it's not going to be, oh, look for him here, he's hiding somewhere. No, when he comes back, everybody's going to know it. Now, there's a problem that occurs, and that is because of what was written there. And what happened was Jesus talked about a time from the midpoint of the 70th week until the end of the 70th week. And then after that, he talks about something, says immediately after the tribulation of those days. And he goes on, and I'll cover that in just a moment. And so everyone seems to think, well, this things that he's talking about are what happens after he returns. But this is actually referring to the time immediately after the beginning of sorrows, not after the midpoint of the 70th week. The structure was, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so this final part is referring to the end of the age, not the sign of his coming directly. So let's read what it says. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. This talks about what looks like the rapture. And so a lot of people say, well, see, this happens after this previous section where Jesus talks about something that begins at the midpoint of the 70th week and continues on to the end of the 70th week. So a lot of people think, well, Matthew 24, the sequence of that book, is the authority and everything has to conform to it. When in actuality, he is answering the questions in the order they were asked, not in a chronological order. So then the next thing that happens is we see a parable of the fig tree. Now, learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So with this parable of the fig tree, we're getting a confirmation that these things will happen before he returns. And so it continues on. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know, until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So this represents another indication that the rapture will come, and it will come at a time when people aren't expecting it. So if we're in the 70th week and we see the abomination of desolation, we'll know exactly how many days it will be until he returns. We don't have to guess the day or the hour, because the 70th week is given in a very specific period of time. This is telling us that we won't know the time, that we are going to just have to watch and wait and see when it happens. But he's given us enough things that are going to be happening around that same time that we'll know the time is near. And that's the most important part. So to summarize everything up, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 give us a lot of information about the Olivet Discourses. A lot of people look at Matthew 24 as the authority over Mark 13 and Luke 21 as far as the chronological sequence. I happen to see that the Revelation is the chronological authority, and that it is very well defined. And so we should look at these other books and see, how do these events fit into the Revelation, not the Revelation fitting into these other books. And again, we're told in chapter 1, verse 3 of the Revelation, and I'm paraphrasing, to read it as it is and hear it as it is and keep it as it is, so that we'll be blessed. And when you see these things and fit them into the book as it's written, not trying to shoehorn the Revelation into some other part of the Bible, but understanding that everything in the Bible has its place in the Revelation, then we can see. And the key to understanding this is realizing that in Matthew 24, verse 3, we see a three-part question. And this three-part question is answered in the order it was asked. But, however, that order was not chronological. And so the book unfolds in a certain way, and a lot of people are confused, thinking that it is the chronologies don't line up, but they do when you realize that it is being asked and responded to in a very particular way. Now, as far as Mark 13 and Luke 21, they seem to not have as much structure. Mark 13 is a little better than Luke 21, but they still have common elements. So when we see the common elements, then we can link those to that time that is, first of all, defined by the revelation, but then reinforced by the proper understanding of the chronology of Matthew 24. Then Mark 13 and Luke 21 can be seen to augment Matthew 24, and then all three of them find their place in the revelation. So I know this is a lot to look at, but you take a look at these, read these chapters, study them, and see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Look for yourself and see if these things are so. Because this is something that you have to see for yourself. If you're just looking for someone that has a commentary that you're just going to rely on, that's not going to hold up. You really need to study these things for yourselves, come to these conclusions. I'm offering suggestions. I'm not saying it's absolute fact, but this is what I'm finding, and it seems to make very good sense to me, and it also helps give me the understanding, and I think I'm receiving that blessing that is mentioned in Revelation 1, chapter 1, verse 3. So in the meantime, the next video that I intend to do is going to be about Revelation chapter 6, and this is when the scroll is opened and we see the four horses. The first 6 of the 7 seals are opened, and we'll go into those and touch briefly about them. And it's not so much about saying, oh, this is happening, and this is this and this is that, but give us an opportunity that this is the time frame that the beginning of sorrows occurs in, and so that we can start looking at these things and see if they match up with current events. And it's actually kind of interesting. So when Jesus said, watch and you be ready, then we'll see these things happening, and we know the time is near. So in the meantime, until the next video, God bless you, and I'll see you next time. Hey, what you doing? You gonna let me make my video now?